Woo! We have gotten off to a hot start with the Brock Purdy contract situation and the San Francisco 49ers. What do? Million rumors floating out there, crazy scenarios. Let's jump into it. What's up, everybody? I am going to touch on what seems to have just taken on a life of its own ever since the Tom Pelissero report this past weekend. The Brock Purdy and his camp are going to be seeking top of the market dollars per year and in a contract in total, which absolutely was the match to light it all on fire. And it is just beginning to burn, but we're going to touch on it to kind of kick things off here. So, hit that thumbs up. Obviously, if you're watching and you like this channel, if you have more thoughts, obviously drop it in the comments or hit me on the socials. I have it right there below my name. Would love to interact a little bit more. But here's the deal, guys. They're going to sign him. Every content creator, everybody out there talking about, oh, like you could just not pay him and let him sit at home, or you could trade Brock Purdy, or, all these different wild scenarios, which we'll get to are just not realistic. This is a team that's already in major cap issues heading into next year. And just focusing on the Brock portion of it. Look, he has been historically one of the best quarterbacks ever in the NFL before his 25th birthday. He's 4-2 in the playoffs with a Super Bowl appearance already at 24 years old in his first 3 years. I understand people are going to divert and go, oh my God, but his roster, and he had this, and he had the Avengers, and CMC. And look, it is what it is, right? Jalen Hurts stepped into a pretty good situation. They haven't won a Super Bowl. There's a lot of guys. Joe Burrow, within his first 2 years, had Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon. That was a pretty decent situation. So don't let the outside noise cloud everything that he has done and accomplished. He's eclipsed 9,000 yards just about so far in 3 years. He's going to have a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio in his first 3 years. He's 23-11 currently, and with a few games to go, obviously, in this season. And most importantly, Kyle trusts him. He is proven to run Kyle's offense. Kyle has even evolved into running a little bit more of a spread out, wide open, throwing the ball down the field offense. And that's going to come into play here in what I'm about to talk about. But the fact of the matter is the Niners have their guy. So no matter what you think about it, they're going to pay Brock Purdy. I have obviously gripes with Brock, as well as everybody probably does, as well as we do with a million quarterbacks, right? Like every quarterback you could probably nitpick a little bit outside of Patrick Mahomes. So there's a lot of issues out there with every single quarterback. Niner fans, tend to live in a bubble and think they're the only ones who, have a quarterback that has deficiencies, and yet their franchise is, Super Bowl or bust, which I find kind of hilarious, being that we're in the 30th year and anniversary season of them winning their last Super Bowl. So take that for what it's worth. At the end of the day, the Niners are in Kyle's 8th year of this regime, just wrapping it up. They have had Brian Hoyer, Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance. Then they lucked out into Brock. Okay. So my first point on all of this is I think Kyle and John are very scared to go in a different direction. And sorry, real quick. And they've had Sam Darnold, which we'll touch on. But I think they're really nervous on moving in a different direction and pulling the ripcord on this parachute, because they can't identify a franchise quarterback. So if you think that, for example, Brock is not the guy, do not pay Brock Purdy. You cannot win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy. He is not the quarterback of the future for whatever reasons. That blame should come back onto Kyle and John, that they can't identify the right quarterback. This is their 8th season they're wrapping up, heading into year 9, and they are still having these questions. Meanwhile, they have passed on a number of bona fide superstar quarterbacks. I know everybody wants to go back. If we want to go back to the first draft, they took Solomon Thomas over Patrick Mahomes. Okay. Like right out of the gates. So Kyle obviously has a very specific quarterback in mind, which I disagree with, but it is showing that there are guys out there that, even though they might be more talented or whatnot, they don't fit what he is trying to do and accomplish. And that goes all the way from, again, passing on Mahomes, taking Beathard in the third round, who is very similar in how he plays or did play to Trey Lance. Or I'm sorry, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, Jimmy Garoppolo. Starting to sense the picture here. This is what Kyle Shanahan wants. He wants a guy like Brock Purdy that can, yes, make some plays after the fact, but plays on time, can read defenses, can run his system. I just laugh at all the people out there and be like, oh, imagine what Kyle would do with Josh Allen, or imagine what he would do with, Lamar Jackson. Kyle would hate those guys. It would drive him absolutely crazy because those guys operate in a different manner. Same with Aaron Rodgers, of what Kyle wants to do, which is get the ball out on time to where he has deemed there is a person open. That's the end of it. So that's why he loves Brock Purdy. And that's why they're going to pay Brock Purdy. And I don't think it makes sense, if you're going to talk about it and just be real on it, that one, this team has had a lot of issues, as I just outlined, of being able to identify the right quarterback, not just one that's going to win a Super Bowl, but one that's going to fit Kyle Shanahan's offense. So the team's ability to locate and develop a quarterback has been a glaring issue for years. They finally got one who's young, going in to be 25 years old, and they've got him under their roof, and they've had him for 3 years, who's only going to ideally get better and progress. And with that, go look at all these quarterbacks for the most part, especially go back into history. Everybody wants to say, like his biggest comparison is Drew Brees. Go look at Drew Brees' early numbers, right? Like it wasn't until, really like his last year or so in San Diego at the time, and then he got to Sean Payton and became an all-time great, right? So it takes time for these guys to develop. All these quarterbacks that people are saying, which we'll get to that. I'm jumping ahead here. And I think the last part is like, why would they move off someone who's been highly productive and very respected in that locker room, right? Like, guys like McCaffrey, like Kittle, Trent Williams, all these guys have Brock Purdy's back. So what are you telling them if you're moving off of Brock? Because he played well enough to ask for what is mediocre, average, the mean of NFL quarterback money? I don't think they should pay him the number one quarterback money in the NFL, but nobody's saying they will. So everybody's just, typical hot button, jump to conclusions, on Twitter and in the media. But I think everybody has to take a deep breath and just understand, like, he's the guy for Kyle. Like, period, end of story. This is happening. And again, you could argue that they shouldn't pay him, XYZ, $65 million a year. But the fact is, there's a lot of mediocre quarterbacks being paid under that or very close to that. And that's just the going rate. When you have the salary cap going up 10, 15, 20% per year, that contract in 2-3 years is going to be like very mediocre, right? Because we're going to re-up guys like Mahomes, guys like Allen, guys like, whoever, Jalen Hurts or Lamar. In 3-4 years, those guys are all going to renegotiate, and Brock will, let's say he signs for $55 million, $60 million. In 3-4 years, he's going to be a bargaining chip. Like, it's going to be right back to middle of the road or below that. It's just the way the NFL works. So I'm not too concerned about the average per year, to be totally honest with you. As always, it comes down to the guarantee period, or it comes down to the guaranteed per year or total guarantees. If they can get it at a structured rate where that is guaranteed, let's say years 2 and 3, and then you're free and clear of it, there's not a lot of risk there. Somebody was arguing you can't pay these guys these contracts because if things go sideways, you're completely done for 3-4 years. BS. The Denver Broncos currently are gonna make the playoffs most likely, and they are eating 40, 50, 60 million of dead cap in Russell Wilson's contract. That's ridiculous, and we will talk about that as well. The next point that I wanted to make is, who else are you going to have play quarterback next year, right? Like, let's say they trade Brock Purdy. Let's say a team comes calling, the Jets, the Raiders, the Giants, and they're like, look, we'll give you a first and a second round pick for Brock Purdy. Okay, Kyle pulls the trigger. We're going to save some money here. Okay, like, unless it's the top 5, you're not getting Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. That's bye-bye. Let's be honest, those guys are going top 5 because there's a lot of quarterback needy teams, and teams get desperate and they're going to go high. The names that are floating out there, Kirk Cousins, guy's completely washed, got benched last night for Michael Penix. His career is pretty much done. Might be a backup, but he is done being a starter and a bona fide starter, at least in this league. If you watch him play the last couple of weeks, he has zero drive off of that Achilles. He can't reach the ball or get the ball past 15 yards downfield. He can't move in the pocket. Completely washed. Aaron Rodgers, million things to go on with Aaron Rodgers, right? We don't need to rehash that one. Zach Wilson, you got to be kidding me, right? Goes to Denver. They draft Bo Nix. It wasn't even a competition. Bo Nix blew him out and started right away. Okay, so Zach Wilson, okay, whatever. He's out. Sam Darnold. The Vikings are not just going to let Sam Darnold walk this year after what's happening. They might bring him back. They could tag him and trade him. That's probably most likely. That's what you do when you have a really good asset coming off of a really good year and is valuable. They are most likely going to tag him and trade him. So you're telling me the guy that Brock Purdy beat out last year in training camp, coming off of his own injury, they are going to then give up draft capital to go trade back for and then pay him money. What, like, you guys got to listen to yourselves when you're saying some of these things. Is Sam Darnold also just going to pack Justin Jefferson's bags and bring it back to Santa Clara with him? Because that would be cool. Like, maybe if you get a package deal, I would consider Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson. You might have to trade like 8 first-round picks to make that happen. So it ain't happening, all right? We talked on Shador. We talked on Cam Ward. They're not going to get up into the top 5 and take that swing and miss again, especially the fact is if they did that and they missed, like, it's guaranteed your job's over. Like, you're getting fired. So that's not happening. I think overall, it just comes down to, again, like, be realistic with options, right? Like, that's my biggest gripe with these. Like, I understand it's fun. It's fantasy land. We make all these trades, all these things. It ain't going to happen, guys. Like, there's like 7 or 8 teams that are desperate for quarterbacks and will move mountains to get it. So if you're going to trade for one, you're going to have to outbid those other teams. Reclamation projects don't always work, as we've seen plenty of times. Jimmy G, and Sam Darnold again, like, when he came here, like, he wasn't good enough to beat out Brock. So I really don't understand that one at all. And then people are, for the most part, freaking out because Purdy is such an unconventional story at the end of the day. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the biggest arm strength or the most arm strength. He was the last pick in the draft. It's going to take a long time for him to shake that, just like Tom Brady did. He's the quiet, chill dude. He doesn't ruffle any feathers. Like, don't really hear him out there talking and chirping. But again, like, the other thing is, too, he has shown that he is good enough to win when there's talent around him, just like every quarterback. Joe Burrow balling out. Yeah, that's great. How's his team doing this year? Oh, that's right. Like, they're not going to make the playoffs because they don't have a defense or special teams, and they've got a piss poor offensive line. Next, Justin Herbert's probably doing the best, but what about Justin Herbert the last couple of years? They paid. And again, I'm not comparing them to this. I understand Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow. These guys are 10 times the specimen that Brock is when you look at size, speed, arm strength. They can make all the throws, all that, but that's not everything. All I'm trying to say is, like, when there's talent around Brock Purdy, he can win football games. He has shown that. He can win playoff games. He can get you pretty much, he didn't lose that Super Bowl versus the Chiefs, right? Like, there was that play. I understand he could have maybe connected with Ayuk in the back of the end zone, and the Niners are world champions this year. But at the end of the day, like, he gave him a shot to win. He's not the one who was on the field that let Mahomes drive down and beat him. That was the defense. So he put up a fight. He was competing. He was right there. He can win if there's talent around him. And that kind of goes to my last point, which is, like, all these people, like, do not pay Brock Purdy $50 million, $55 million per year. You cannot win a Super Bowl with that. Well, here's a little, like, breaking news in case anybody hasn't, like, really looked at the league or really done the homework on it. There's only 3 active starting quarterbacks in the NFL who've won a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, who's washed, and Matt Stafford, who's on the very tail end of his career. I think he's like 37 or 38 years old. So do these same questions about you can't pay someone 50, 55 million a year, does that go for Jalen Hurts? Does it go for Joe Burrow? Does it go for Josh Allen? Does it go for Lamar? I don't know. Everyone loves to pick on Dak, and everybody loves to pick on these other guys. Like, okay, well, like, nobody else has a ring either. So you got to keep the argument consistent if that's the way you're going to go. And the reason I don't even think that's a good argument is because all those teams paid their quarterback and they have really good teams around them. That has not been the problem with the 49ers this year. The problem with the 49ers this year is they are and have been insanely top heavy with star studded players, guys like Christian McCaffrey. Ayuk last year was humming. Debo, outside of Kittle, every single Trent Williams, they got old. They got old fast, and they tried to run it back 1 year too long. In addition to that, they have drafted horrendously. I know they've landed a few guys this past draft, and Renardo Green, Dominic Pooney, who look really solid. They look like solid football players. You can't hit on one or two guys to draft and be like, you know what, we're going to sustain success here. That's just not how it works in the league. Like, I'm sorry. You look at the teams that are all in playoff contention right now, outside of the Texans with a rookie quarterback and the Commanders with a rookie quarterback. Bills, they paid their guy. Chiefs, paid their guy. Eagles, paid their guy. Rams, paid their guy. Lions, Packers. All these teams have $50 million quarterbacks. How are they doing so good? How do they build a roster that's so good and they can win 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 games this year? It's because you draft well, guys. Like, at the end of the day, Brock Purdy can operate just as solidly as Jared Goff, or he can do the same things as Jalen Hurts. We've seen it last year. They have absolutely last year they smoked the Eagles. Like, we have seen it. And then what happened? The Eagles went out and they drafted really damn well. They drafted 2 corners who are bona fide studs. They improved their offensive line with Mekhi Becton. They went out and signed a potential MVP in Saquon Barkley at running back. And look, wow, Jalen Hurts looks awesome again. And they're absolutely steamrolling teams. They signed a linebacker right off the top of my head. I forget his name. Unrestricted free agent. 49ers signed Devontae Campbell. They signed this guy. He's probably a Pro Bowler. He is having a fantastic season. Like, center, Jason Kelce retired. Oh, look, 2 years ago, they drafted another center who was a pretty good prospect, and they groomed him and worked with him, and he stepped in, and he hasn't skipped a beat. So, again, it comes down to drafting well, developing well, putting the players around these quarterbacks to succeed. If Packers didn't have, this young receiving core that kills it, and they didn't go out and sign Josh Jacobs, and they didn't have a good offensive line, where would the Jordan Love be? Maybe struggling. Nobody talks about CJ Stroud taking a step backwards. Where's that conversation? I know he's in a second year, but this is Brock's second year of really fully starting. So Brock's taking a step back. Everyone's like, he's just not the guy. He's not the guy. They're losing games. CJ Stroud's having a really pretty poor season, to be totally honest with you. Go look at his numbers. Go look at what he's done. Why is CJ Stroud and the Texans winning? Well, they've built a pretty good defense. D'Amico Ryans is an absolute star on that side of the ball in terms of coaching. They've got a pretty good offensive line. Nico Collins is an absolute stud. Tank Dell's a good player. Dalton Schultz is a good player. And they signed Joe Mixon, who's having a fantastic season. It comes down to the talent, that's just it at the end of the day. So this is a long-winded way of saying they need to get back to the basics. They're going to pay Brock Purdy, but it's not the end of the world. Whether he wins a Super Bowl or doesn't, this is what's going to happen. And the Niners can very easily be contending again next year if they smash this offseason. They get rid of some of these really poor contracts and players that are on the downside of their career, and they knock this draft out of the park. They can be right back in it, just like the rest of these teams, but they got to hit on the pieces around them. And that goes for every quarterback out there. Mahomes is the only player who has had really, really poor stats, to be totally honest with you, that's getting paid that much money. And the Chiefs are in contention. Why is that? Because they've found the formula where they're happy to win games like 17-14. They have a very reliable target in Mahomes. They run the ball and grind it out. They play insane situational football. They're great in the trenches and great on defense. They're not out there putting up, 35 points a game, and they don't need to. They play a different style. So maybe that's the style that, the 49ers should play. If you don't think Brock Purdy's the spread quarterback that's going to put up, record numbers each season, there's a lot of different ways to win football games and possibly win titles in this league. And I think they just need to reset the board a little bit and get back to that. But they're going to pay Brock Purdy. So all this, gaslighting you see out there and all these content creators freaking out, coming up with these like Madden trades and these fantasy football like type ideas. Just don't give them any credence. It ain't going to happen, guys. The best possible thing you can do is say, look, get Purdy healthy. He's going to sign, in the next 3 to 4 years, rebuild around him and get this thing going back on the right track. That's all I got. Quick little rant because I've heard so much out there and it's just so frustrating hearing all these, people talk about just these like outrageous hypothetical like scenarios when they're not even going to come close to coming true. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Give me a follow on the socials down there, that side right there. And